All right, let me do it. Okay, we're live. Hey, okay, hold on. I'm just going to change my settings like I always do. And I always feel bad, Catie. When I watch these later, I'm like, it's just like so bad that somebody just has to sit there and wait for me. Awkward.
I have no problem waiting.
Okay, good. All right, good. I'm all set. All right, so here's how I do it. So Catie and I like really just talked about like 10 minutes ago. So I'm going into this blind mostly. So I have like no canned questions or anything like that. But Catie, what we do is I say who I am. I'm going to share just in case there's somebody who's like never seen this before, somebody outside of our church or something. And then I will kind of share what wilderness stories are. And then I'm going to give you the chance to introduce yourself. And then, hey, Dina. Okay. And so then I really love it when people will say that they're here. So, you know, it'd be totally cool if Catie and I are just having our own conversation, but it's way more fun with more people.
Yeah.
And all right, let's see. And my train of thought is often like totally shot by this time of day on the weekend. So don't worry about that. So where was I going? All right. Well, and then Catie, I think I told you a couple of the questions that I ask everybody at the beginning. So we'll see if you have an answer for that. But if you don't, totally cool.
Sure.
So I'm Lauren Garrity. I'm one of the associate pastors at Messiah. I focus on like newcomers. So like in normal times, I am a welcoming person. I like focus on making sure that when people walk through the doors of our church, they just know that they're not only welcome, but like that we are so happy that they're there. And then I kind of started trying to teach everybody, like, not only should we be doing this inside our building, but we should be doing this all throughout our communities with no agenda. Not like we're trying to get people to come to our building, but just like, how do we share the love of God that we receive with everyone we encounter? So we were working on that. And so now, you know, pandemic times, I'm like, what can I do? So that's one of the reasons I started doing these wilderness stories, which sort of started because in my Sunday morning group, we were reading a book by Rachel Held Evans, which is amazing. She kind of talks about the genre of the Bible and how we can read it differently when we sort of understand how it was intended to be understood. And she talked about wilderness and how God is always faithful to God's promises. God always has delivered God's people, but it often involves a detour or two where God's people are in the wilderness like, what on earth? What, you know, have you abandoned us? Why have you done this? And we can't see anything. We're like in the dark. That's why I put this background on our little wilderness stories of the trees. It's like we're in the dark, just like, you know, trying to find our way through the forest. That's how I think of it. So and then when we get through to the other side, we're like, oh, wow, you know, I can see that God was there. It's just, you can't see it when you're in it. So it's really strengthening us for us to be able to like hear how God has done that for other people. Yay. And here's Allison. She's here. This is one of my like childhood best friends. So anyway, so Catie's here. So Catie, tell us a little bit about who you are, and I will interject if I need to.
A little bit about who I am. Well, I am a Northern Virginia native. Moved around a bit into different places, but mainly have been rooted here. And it's funny, I think what I tend to go to most is who am I? And I always go towards like my profession because that's where most of my heart is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a mental health therapist for the Northern Virginia area for outpatient.
I wore this for you. All right, go ahead.
Mental Health Awareness Month. And who am I as a person outside of my work? I'm a very creative person. I think I'm pretty playful and can be pretty silly, although sometimes I can be very serious, but I love nature. I love being outside. I love my cat and my dog. I have the most amazing partner I could ever ask for and hope for. I have amazing sisters, and Yeah, I really love things rooted in nature. That's a lot of who I am. I think if I could kind of sum it up.
Yeah, like Catie and I were talking about like how do we see, okay, so I hope Catie that maybe later she'll share a little bit about her, well, this will probably come up in her story, but I said, well, do you go to church? And she said, well, I do like sometimes, but she really like encounters God like on a morning walk, you know, in nature. And I was like, yep, I can totally understand that. So
Yeah.
all right, and we'll continue to learn more as we go. I wanted to ask you, I think I prepared you for this, but I'm not sure. Do you have like a Bible verse, a scripture passage, a Bible character, just anybody that's ever jumped off the page, anything that's like guided your life? Do you have anything like that?
I do. I think I get torn between like the passage and verse and the character.
Mm-hmm.
Passage and verse is very easy because I have it tattooed on my wrist, and I've had it there for I think 10 years, and I always go back to it. And I know I had emailed it to you, but it's the verse. It's Matthew 14:31, where
I don't know if I saw that.
yeah, it was. And of course, I wish I brought my Bible with me, but of course, like everything else, it's packed up right now. But
Yeah, I can. You have it memorized?
in my mind, I do.
So it says, here's the NIV. It says, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt?
Mhm.
Is that the one? Matthew 14:31.
Yeah, that's when Peter was, out in the boat on the water, and there was a storm, and I think like everyone would do, we're freaking out, and he sees Jesus, and Jesus, he was like, if that's you, tell me to come, um, and Jesus was like, question answered, go ahead and come. And Peter's like, okay, cool. I'm going to come across the water and come find you. And then as he steps out on the boat and he goes to him, he freaks out and has a moment where he's like, this can't be real. And then he just falls in the water and then does what we would do and panic. And then Jesus just kind of walks up and was like, why? Why did you do that? And it's silly and funny, but also very heartfelt and
Yes.
serious all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's funny that we're talking about a wilderness story because that's the verse that always gets me through any wilderness moment for me.
Yep. I always think about that emotion that was probably in Peter. Like that always really gets me to see Jesus after knowing like that Peter had denied him 3 times. You know, maybe he was carrying guilt or whatever. And just so to have this opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, you know, and that Jesus received him, like that has always touched me too.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So would you say Peter is like a character that you really kind of resonate with or not really?
He is, but actually, and this is probably, I feel like any Bible character you pick is a classic answer, but I actually, if I had to pick a Bible person, I would honestly pick Jesus because, I didn't grow up learning about faith and religion. I didn't grow up going to church, and I learned about going to church, and my interest started to become stronger going to church when I was probably about 17, 18 years old. And after 18, when my dad passed away, I went to church with a friend. And in your email, you had said, when was there a time for you when God became something more than words on a page or jumped off the page? And my time at that church, it was all words on a page, and it was all like following the rules and doing things just so. And, it was for me when I was a little bit older in like my mid to late 20s, where I was like, I really need to figure this out for myself. I really want to figure out why I'm still drawn to this faith of mine.
Totally.
And so I did a little Bible study with myself and for myself, starting in Matthew, just to start somewhere. And I think I learned, at least from what I've read, I'm no expert, but Jesus is such a fascinating character because he has moments where he gets grumpy, and he has moments where he's so giving and patient, and he has moments where he seems like such an introverted person, where the at least for me, you know, him getting grabbed at by his clothes, by people, and always having to show and teach and tell and explain. Um, you know, he has a really great discussion about boundaries, and I just he's always, him and his story are always the reason why my heart goes back to my faith.
Yeah.
So I think I pick him.
Yeah, like we could talk about that all day, but I do love that. I mean, yeah. So first of all, he was such a rule breaker, which I'm inspired by. I'm not a good rule breaker. I mean, I hate to break rules, and I hate to be in trouble, and I don't like to make people upset. But I mean, that's what he did. You know, that's why he died, because he was like making people upset. And something else you said, oh yeah, about boundaries. You know, I'm always reminded, like, he really spent about like 4 years of his life doing like this active ministry. That's a short time. And during it, he would often leave a place. Like, it's not as if the needs dried up, but he just like kind of kept focused on what he needed to do. And I think so often we feel like we have to, you know, we feel bad if we have, you know, to leave something that's not done or whatever, but you know, that's not always what we're called to do. So
Yeah.
Cool. So Catie, we could go from there. I've been telling people over the last few weeks, I used to start these different, like I, you know, ask you that question and just see where we go. But I think I would like it if you just opened up with sharing the parts of your story that you feel you kind of want to share. And then I'll ask you questions as you share. And then also, just so you know, probably like 5-ish or 5:15 at the latest. Like, if we're still going and we're like, whoa, we have so much more to talk about, then we'll just do a part 2, you know, so you don't have to feel like you'll be here all day. I'll let you go at a certain point.
Okay. Oh boy, where to start? I think for me, for me to start, and because you obviously know so much more than I do. I think to start, when I think about what the wilderness story means to me, wilderness story to me is, you know, when, and from what I remember, I think it was in like Exodus when, you know, the people of the Israelites, I believe, were being led out of Egypt to, I think they call it like Canaan, Promised Land. And during that time, you know, I remember you said I picked this background because it's like the wilderness, but to me the wilderness is like this desert where there's like nothing to hold on to that gives you a sense of hope.
Yeah.
And it's so it just feels so hopeless and never ending, and like right when you think you've gotten a solid distance, it doesn't feel like you've moved at all.
Ugh, yeah.
And so I reflected on that, and you know, the people being led by Moses through the wilderness had moments where they just complained and they were tired and they were exhausted, and I was processing that, and I was like, well, if we're stuck in a place where we're not happy with who we are or what we have or how we feel or what we're looking for, we're going to complain and we're going to have, you know, moments of griping and being upset. But I think what differentiated that was that they complained and then they lost their faith. And so, you know, my wilderness, I could have talked about so many things, but for me, the number one thing that I've faced that has dragged me through this desert wilderness in my heart has been money. And, you know, money is hard. Money is really hard. And, you know, it started when, I grew up in a rather privileged home. I'm white. We were middle class. My dad made a really healthy living. My mom was able to stay at home. So growing up, I knew my privilege, and I didn't really think about it that often. But I didn't need that. I guess that was a privilege in and of itself. I didn't need to think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But it was, money started to become an issue when I was in, high school, when my parents' marriage started to really get rocky, and money became more and more and more obvious of a stressor and a point of tension. And then when my dad passed away when I was 18, it was literally right when I started college. And because of my parents' marriage having such, taking the center stage, I didn't think about college. I didn't think about where I was going. I didn't go on college tours. That wasn't in the cards. And so I started at community college, and, after my dad passed away, things kind of derailed from there. And when my dad passed away, money was such a warring topic. And it created so much division, and it created so much anger and so much just hate and greed, and I saw it happen.
Like with your mom and
Yeah.
you, or your mom and who? Or with you, or who was the division with?
I felt like the division existed mainly with my mom and my dad's family.
Okay, yeah.
And then the division started to exist between my mom and then me and my sisters. And, looking back, I can understand, and there's a lot of pieces to it that just make it complicated, but, I can understand, looking back, my mom's sense of fear and the need for money, and how it challenges and poked at our stability and our security.
Mm-hmm.
But the emotional pain was there. But with that being the platform of understanding money, I didn't have training on money. I was given a bank account, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. I don't know what it means to save money. I don't know what it means to have an IRA or 401k. I don't know any of this stuff. And so talk about going into the wilderness with literally like no pack on your back of like resources to lean on.
Yeah.
And then, I didn't know what I wanted to do with school. I didn't have, I kind of felt like I didn't have time to think about it. I didn't have time to figure it out. And I just kind of.
It sounds like you were like probably grieving the death of your father. Also, maybe you were, sometimes when we're so stressed about like family issues, how are we supposed to be able to have any space left to think about what we want or where we want to go? Were you kind of like just in survival mode at that point, right?
Yeah. I think it was a lot of survival mode. It was constant survival mode, especially emotionally. And there were many ways.
Did you feel like anybody had your back at that point, or were you pretty much like on your own?
I know there were people who had my back, undoubtedly. I feel like my sisters did. I feel like my sisters never stopped having my back. I think they were the most consistent people that I could ever, the two of them. I know there were other family members that had my back, and they had my back in different ways and what they thought was having my back in different ways, but no, sometimes I feel like it did more harm than good because of all the strife that happened. But it was survival mode. And I think it was survival mode emotionally during that time.
Yeah.
And then as time went on, it transitioned into like financial survival mode. So it just went from one basket to another.
Right.
So yeah, I was going through college and, figuring my stuff out. And I think finances, like when I was in my undergrad, I was going to school full time and I would work part time, and I figured out a system of how to save money. But I had moments where I was like grabbing change, like any excess change I could find to help me go towards like my groceries and everything. And, money during that time had developed to be a very taboo topic to talk about. It kind of already is to begin with, but it became more so of a heated, emotional, taboo topic in my home.
Well, because if you brought it up, you didn't want to also bring up all of the strife that went with that, probably, right? You wanted to like maybe keep it a little bit peaceful.
Yeah. And it was money in my family was, and I think this might go for many people, but served as a showing of success.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Like
you have money, if you have money, if you make money, you're successful. And, I felt for a long time, like I don't feel successful for being in my mid-20s and not having like an IRA or 401k to my name and, $2,000 in my account. And that's what I was running off of all the time. And it was, I never felt successful.
Yeah.
And there was a time after, and this is where I think of like the wilderness where they're like, yep, we're going on an adventure. We're going to the promised land. Like we've got this. And like, there's a sense of motivation and like, we can do this. We've got this. This is where, like, if I could picture myself in a desert, I'd start to like drag my feet and give up hope. And
what was it about this time, or are you going to get there, that made you feel like that? You're going to get there?
Yeah, it got there when I finished I finished my undergrad, and I had an undergrad degree in education. So I could have gone into teaching, which was originally my intention, but I couldn't get a job anywhere. I couldn't get anything teaching. I couldn't get anything. I couldn't even get like administrative work. I couldn't get anything. And I felt I was like, I just got a bunch of money put into college and it's not even doing anything and I can't even get a job. I feel worthless. I just feel so stupid. And so then I decided to, after grad school or after undergrad, I decided to just go into substitute teaching. I thought, well, my undergrad is in education. Let's see if I put my foot on the door for some education experience. And that's where it got really hard. And being a substitute teacher, especially if that's your main source of income, it's an exhausting job with a lot of stress and not a lot of money coming in. I was 25, going to be 26, and I needed health insurance because the one from my mom was going to roll off soon, and I was sick. I was physically sick because you're going from school to school to school, classroom to classroom to classroom with a bunch of kids. And I had pneumonia, I got flu, and this was all within like a 6-month time frame where it was just horrible. And I had all the money I saved, I had spent on going to the doctor because I was sick. And it was horrible, and my anxiety was really high. And I remember in my faith, I thought to myself, like, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I remember praying about it a lot. And I always say magically something happened, but I always look back on God and I'll tell that piece more in hindsight later, but I managed to get a full-time administrative job. And I was like, perfect. And during that time frame, I was applying for grad school because I decided I'm going to make the effort and go to school and get a job that I really wanted to do, which was going into mental health counseling, and which was not an easy decision. And if anybody knows schooling for mental health counseling, it's like a 62 credit program. It's a long program with a lot of training and work involved. But I decided to do it. And so in my time, though, like almost like the next 6 months, you know, going into grad school, I got my own health insurance, and I had a stable job, and I made a paycheck, you know, and I look back at it and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that was a lot to me, but it was a lot to me. And I was so excited about it that I was able to save money, and I was like, good, I'm going into grad school. This is going to be really helpful for me. I finally have a financial cushion I can put aside and use to help myself. And then when I started grad school, it took up all of my time, and I could only do, you know, part-time work because I was in full-time school, and I had to make the tough decision of, you either had to do school full-time and get health insurance through the university, or you worked full-time and got health insurance through working if you could find a job, and you'd have to do school part-time, which would take
forever.
6 years.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to draw out that process. So I got into grad school at Marymount, so I was at least local, and I at least got to live at home. And I worked part-time, but in grad school, which kicked my butt, it's an exhausting, time-consuming program. I lost my money again because I had to pay for commuting and the university expenses, like parking passes and books and everything. And because I didn't have time to work, I worked a part-time job over the weekend where I made like $200 paychecks twice a month. And my anxiety just, this is where like it got hard, and my anxiety was really high, and I was just anxious all the time, and I was worried about money all the time, and I had moments where I would get ill, and I couldn't afford getting the medication that I needed. And I noticed during that time, you know, that was when I started grad school the summer before I had met my partner, and so she was a saving grace financially. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Can you hear me now? How did you meet her? Where did you meet her?
Well, funny enough, so she and I actually went to the same high school together and graduated in the same class. And we were friends during that time, and we had disconnected, and then we just connected again through social media.
Yeah.
You know, over that summer, and then we just were like, wow, where have you been my whole life?
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so this is our 5th year of being together, and
wow.
Yeah. And so it was kind of like I started the grad school journey. I didn't have a lot of money. Or like before that, I got my full-time administrative job. I got money. God was like, I got you. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. And then I started grad school, and I didn't have any money, and I was getting anxious and sick. And then there again, you know, I had my partner in my life, and she came from a family that struggled with money. And, you know, she was also in grad school, so she understood what I was going through, and she understood the difficulty with money. And, you know, in many ways of both understanding me, but also saying, it's okay, let me get this medication for you. It was another godsend, but I didn't feel like it in the moment, because it wasn't what I was looking for. It wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want her to have to help me. I didn't want her to have to buy that thing for me. I didn't want to have to struggle. And I just was so upset.
So was the messaging that you were like saying to yourself, was it, I'm really unsuccessful, I don't even have the money to buy this medication? Or was it, I really feel horrible having to take this like gift from my partner? Or was it like a mix of both? Or
It was a very lethal mix of both. It was absolutely both. And it bred a sense of constant failure feelings in me the whole time. And then, you know, working through my first couple of semesters with grad school, I finally decided, and sometimes Laura and I look back and I'm just like, I don't know how I did that. And part of me knows the answer to that, but the other part of me is still just in complete disbelief. But I had decided, because at the time my part-time job was working at a gym, and I was like, I've always wanted to do personal training. And I have a lot of background in like the physical health field. Maybe I could become a personal trainer, and then throughout the rest of grad school, I'll make enough money and I'll be okay. And so while I was doing full-time school and I was working, I also took on the decision to full-time study for becoming a personal trainer, which was another cost that I had to do. And my goodness, and I studied for that, and blessed be, I got it. I passed as a personal trainer. And so here comes another like lifeboat or like life raft where I got a job as a personal trainer at a gym that I really wanted to work at. And while that was a stressful experience of its own, I was able to make money again that could help me float through the rest of grad school. Not to mention that when I was in grad school, we have to do a practicum and internship, which is about a 3-semester long process and about 900 hours total time. And the university, I found this out later, apparently doesn't let you do paid internships, because I don't know why, just apparently you're not supposed to. So, oops. But I applied for an internship, well, a practicum and internship together, and I got one immediately, referred to me by a church friend. And they messaged me back within a couple of days, and they're like, the good news is we pay, and it's like $10 for every session that you do, but you still get money. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So not only am I working as a personal trainer, not only do I have health insurance through school, not only do I get a paid practicum and internship, but I have it and it's secure, I'm good. And I was so thankful and fortunate that blessing carried me through the rest of grad school. And it doesn't mean it wasn't hard. I definitely had times where, you know, I had people who were surrounding me who were like, yeah, we can go out to dinner. And at dinner was like $150 to pay for the group. No big deal. And I thought to myself, that's a big deal, because $50 is a big deal to me. The decision to buy, the decision to, you know, pay for this or pay for that, of both meeting your basic needs, was still a big deal. And I noticed that while my basic needs were getting met, still challenged, but getting met, I noticed that the sense of just bitterness and nastiness grew in me. And I think, and I tell my clients a lot of like, it's scarcity mindset of, I have this and I can't share it. I have this and I can't give it. I have this and I can't let anybody know that I have this, because what if I have to give it up? And, you know, that made me feel a lot of guilt, because I thought about like tithing money, for example, or giving to those who don't have as much. And I felt so torn between, I'm so lucky that I have this to carry me through, but I don't have enough that I want to share it. And is it bad that I don't want to share it? And it just really made me wrestle with myself and wrestle with this person I didn't like being, but I didn't know if I could be anything different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all the while I was doing this and battling this and going through this while helping people, both with their physical health and their mental health. And it was depleting, and it was fulfilling but exhausting.
Yeah.
And so kind of taking that chunk of time, I finished school, completed my internship, and I got a residency. And so in the mental health field, you have to go through your practicum and internship. And then before you become independently licensed, you have to go through your residency or like a supervision time frame.
Mm-hmm.
In the state of Virginia, that time frame, you have to complete about 3,500 hours of work.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
I knew it was a lot, but that's a lot.
It's a lot. It was absolutely a lot. And to be a resident you're a liability more than anything, because you either have to bill under somebody and you have to get supervision. And even though this was in my heart, what I felt called to do, and I tell everybody, if I could live 1,000 lifetimes, I would always, always pick a helping profession.
Mm-hmm.
But, during that time, I started residency, and I was thankful that for the first time since in my life consistently, other than the job I had before I started grad school, I had a full-time job, and that was all I had to worry about for once in my adult life. Was I don't have to worry about balancing and juggling school and this job and that job and this and that. It was literally just work.
Mm-hmm.
But to be a resident means you have to pay for supervision, and you don't make a lot of money because you're a liability. And I was a contracted person, and I had to pay my own taxes, and I had to figure out how to do that system.
It's like trial by fire. You're just having to learn all these really hard things all at one time. Jeez.
Yeah, it was. And I'm thankful that throughout the time, like, I learned how to do it, but it was always like I was lucky that I managed to land on my feet. But during that time, that scarcity and that mindset and that bitterness grew and grew and grew inside of me, where, I would think about people who had money. Like, my younger sister got a job, and earned a lot of money, and she had a lot of financial opportunities because of it. And no fault to her own, but she's like, but we can go do this and we can go do that. And like, for Mother's Day, let's go do this horseback riding thing, and let's go buy that, or let's pitch in on this present. And I could never do it. But I felt like I couldn't say no, so I would force myself to do it. And it's like I have to do this thing to fit in and not isolate myself and hurt myself in the process, or I'd have to isolate myself and protect myself and hurt myself in the process.
When you say you couldn't do it, do you mean you couldn't do it because you didn't have the extra money to do it, or like you just couldn't let go of it because of the anxiety of not having enough?
It was both. And
okay.
In both, I mean, there were moments where financially I definitely couldn't do it, to where, I had student loans to pay now, and I would get a paycheck. And of course, being an independent contractor, each paycheck is literally what you made. You didn't get paid time off. If you got sick, sucks for you. If I didn't see many people that week, I wouldn't make that much. And so it was stressful in and of its own, where I was starting to get clients and I was starting to earn a bit more money, but then I'd have to put some aside for taxes, and I would have to try to replenish my savings that I didn't have much of at that point. And so when we had to like pitch in on a present, it was either bumping my checking account down to like $20 and hoping that nothing gets drawn out from then, or buying groceries, or, you know, whatever it might be. And then there was moments where I was able to put some money into savings, but I just didn't want to give that up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was tough.
So you're like, and if your family, if you had this messaging of like, you need to make money to be worth anything, to mean anything, so then you're constantly bumping up against that message. So you're never like feeling free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other part was tough too. And I think a lot of, especially like millennial generation, would understand how this feels. This place is expensive. This area is expensive. It feels impossible to be able to live on your own. And this area has also grown so much in its sense of elitism with money. And everything is money based around here. And gas is expensive. And it made me have to force myself to look at like the materialism of living here. And I would see, you know, my sister buy things and I would feel so angry. And I would look at myself and I'm like, well, congratulations, Catie. When I graduated, I was 29. I was like, congratulations at the time. You're 29 and you're still not successful. If something happened to you financially, you'd be doomed. And you will never be able to be independent. You'll never be able to take care of yourself the way you want to. And that was what I was hearing in my head over and over and over and over again. And
this is like the message that you heard a lot growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was disheartening.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have moments where I had peers in grad school whose parents paid for their education and paid for their apartments to go to school, or had partners who made a solid living so they could focus on going to school. And Mariah and I didn't have that. And we both struggled side by side. And it just felt never ending. And I had to keep telling myself on like my church walks in the mornings, where I was like, if God got you through undergrad and that time of being a substitute teacher, and he got you that job to hold you over, and then he got you into grad school, and then he helped you get that personal training job, and then he even got you a paid internship, he will look out for you. He's looked out for you this whole time. And I kept telling myself that, but I was so angry because I was like, yeah, but those were all Band-Aids. Like, they were all Band-Aids. And they were just like, oh, we're thirsty. Like, the people in the wilderness, like we're thirsty. We need water. But this isn't enough. And we're hungry. And we don't trust this.
Yeah, but you're like, I want to be.
Yeah.
And you're like, can't God do that for me? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We want, like, I think that was it. Was we weren't comfortable. Mm-hmm. We were always scared. We were always afraid of something that could happen because we just never had enough. And I think that got heightened tenfold during this past year with COVID, because, you know, throughout COVID, I worked full time, if not more so. And I think sometimes I put in 50, 60-hour weeks. Because
exhausting too.
Oh my goodness. And don't get me wrong, this had nothing to do with my clients, and it has nothing to do with the love I have for my job. Ever. But that voice I had in my head of, you're not making enough, you're never going to be successful, you're never going to be able to do this, like you're always going to be struggling, having that mindset during a pandemic while trying to take care of other people's needs and be there for everybody else's needs and not making a lot of money, I think it just destroyed my spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had, unfortunately, some clients who are born and bred in this area who have that elitist money mindset. I literally had a client talk with me about how they were like, yeah, can you believe it? My friend thought that they could be okay on a $30,000 year. Like that's BS. And not, maybe it's because I make six figures, and they just kind of kept going. And I had to sit back and think to myself for a minute and just be like, well, congratulations, your therapist that you're talking to makes $30,000 last year.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I did, I paid all of my taxes on time and I saved money, and I still struggled.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt worthless. I felt stupid. I felt like I hated myself. And I was telling people all the while to take care of themselves, to look out for themselves, and make sure they're okay. And yeah, and
you were like, yeah, you're like confronted with this thing that's like haunting you or torturing you, during this pandemic that you really can't hide from. And yeah, in those moments where we have to confront it or face it, and you have nowhere else to turn, that must have been, excruciatingly exhausting.
yeah, and it bred a lot of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I had moments where my anxiety about money was so high and I was so depleted that we would park to go into like Target, and I would feel my anxiety amping up. And then I was like, no, I can do this. It's fine. It'll be fine. And then we step into Target. We're in there for 5 minutes and I have to leave because I couldn't breathe, and I felt sick to my stomach, and I was near to tears, and it got to a point where I felt like I couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So
where are you today with this? I mean, unless you want to wait and talk about that later, but I'm curious, are you feeling okay like now? Or is this still just like an ongoing sort of like wilderness thread throughout your life?
it's funny you ask me that, because right now, so I think about the story, the wilderness part in the wilderness story where I think it was Moses sends out the spies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yep. With the Rahab story where they go in and yep.
Yeah, I think from what I remember, it was like they go and they come back with like, look at what we found and look at what they have, and this is so great. But then there were people who were skeptical, and they're like, yeah, this is too good to be true. This is terrifying. The people are really big, and and they didn't trust it. Like the thing that they worked so hard for was right going to be there in front of them, and they didn't trust it.
Right.
That's where I am right now.
Yeah, I was wondering about that as I was listening to you talk. I was thinking what it sounds like is, although you've always been struggling to get your feet under you with finances, you have been able to do it. Mm-hmm. So like you have succeeded, but you have this overwhelming anxiety with money. So I'm like, I wonder, and I'm only saying this because, I've had a little bit of anxiety over money where I just would have a really hard time parting from it. Just a lot of like panicky feelings like, and it's like not always rational. I mean, sometimes it is. Like if you really are scrounging around for quarters under the seat of your car, then yeah, like there's anxiety, but like how do we let that go so that we have peace?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what I've found has helped me is And I remember the people in the wilderness just complained and complained and lost their faith. And I think that's honestly the thing that I've had to be mindful of is I have had moments where I've complained, and I've had moments where I've prayed and I'm like, I just don't understand. What message do I need to learn at this point to have to keep going through this? I'm like, this is like 5, 6, 7, 8 years of learning this. Like, you've got to be joking. But I have also learned, and my partner is wonderfully on the same page with me with this, of within our financial limitations, we have been really creative. And within our financial limitations, we have really been able to value what we own and where it comes from and how to maintain its sense of quality. And it's made us look at like the original purpose of materialism of you own something and make it last its lifetime. And we've been more minimal in appreciating what we have, and if we need to buy something, we save for it and we buy it with a purpose.
Yeah.
And it's funny because right now, I finished my residency and I am licensed and I'm in the process of finding a new job, all of which are like the promised land. They literally are what I prayed for. And it scares me. It scares me because I think, oh, I'll finally make more money. And that terrifies me.
You know what? So funny. Well, you can finish your thought before I go into my thought.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's to me it's just I constantly have to go back to being very prayerful about it. And when I get a paycheck, no matter how big or how small, to just have a sense of gratitude for it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a challenge. It's so not funny, but it's interesting. As I listened to these wilderness stories, and then my husband and I were like into this show on Prime. I think the season that was free is not free anymore, but it was called Couples Therapy. It was like, have you seen that?
I haven't. I didn't even know that
really
existed.
Good. Oh my gosh. A friend told me about it recently. So, and this, I know, but like these tools that we've developed to survive, they cling to us, so that when you get to a point where you don't need it anymore, even these masks, for example, with the pandemic, like we're getting to a point where we may not need to wear them as much. Well, how do we not do, I'm just using this as an analogy. I know we still need them to be safe in some settings, but it does feel hard to let them go. There's like a sense of shame mixed in there. It's like very hard to let go of those messages that we've held on to so tightly because maybe for a period of time we needed them.
Yeah.
So I don't think we ever need the shame and condemnation that comes from some of these messages like that you've been describing. I know that's never from God, but anyway, I'll get to that later too.
Yeah.
So I have questions, but I don't want to interrupt where you're going. So you do your thing and then I'll I'll pepper you with questions.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say that I think it's a matter for me at this point with money. My partner and I have had to talk about it. She was much more open about money. And I had times where I would hoard it from her and I would hide it from her and never show her my account because I was so scared of even sharing it with her.
Yeah.
And we've had to really work through it and we've had to talk about it. But I think what it comes down to is she was never scared to help me. And she never hesitated to help me. And I know that my hesitation to do anything, to help her and to be there for her financially, it was really fear-based. It was not love-based. And so we've thankfully gotten to a place where I can share with her where we are and be a team. And we have respect for one another's needs. And my wilderness story with money is nowhere near as terrible as some people's might have been, especially because mine did not exist growing up. But it really has sobered me when it comes to money. And I know that God has really been there for me the whole time. There's always been some way he's looked out for me, something. It's been through a person or through a job or through an opportunity or through a just something to help me.
Yeah.
And
it honestly sounds like God has been there for you, that's not been a question for you, really. It's fascinating how you've been able to, like, on your walks in the morning, you're able to like name these ways. So that is almost separate. It's almost like you don't have a fear that you're not going to be cared for. You just have a fear that's like, it's just like sucking onto you. Like it's going to, it's like going to remove any peace and freedom that you might ever experience. I'm not saying forever, but you might be like, yes, God has done this for me, but you still have this like fear coming on that's prohibiting you from enjoying those blessings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We have a very symbiotic relationship at this point, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not blaming you for that either. I'm just saying sometimes there's something there that we can be thankful, and yet we are still wrestling with this piece of fear or whatever it might be,
Yeah. I saw someone made a comment. I wanted to read it if that's okay.
Yeah, I just put it up here.
Oh yeah, clinging to those things that make us feel safe is hard to let go of. And it's funny, I think what Lois is saying too with clinging to the things that make us feel safe sometimes, and I find it's really funny how this shows up in my sessions with my clients. Anxiety and fear give us the illusion that we're going to be safe if we keep doing certain things. But it's not, because it's just keeps us scared so we don't move and don't do anything. And I think that's how it's been with me and money, where it's, if I spend this or if I do that or if I give this away, I'm going to send myself back to that place. But I've been learning the opposite, and I think that I think it's just giving me a very sobering perspective on it. And I'm so grateful that there's always been something to look out for me, something to help me get through this journey through God. And just have a deeper sense of appreciation. And I think the last thing that has really given me a sense of perspective too is to not be so bitter to other people who have what you want. Because, like my sister, or, I think about a friend who does not recognize their privilege with money. And it's just very flippant about it and very blasé about it. And it's, they'll be like, oh, what's $20? Oh, what's $40? I'm like, what is $20 is a very good question. And I've learned my own boundaries of internal and external. And I have moments where, Mariah and I will be complaining to each other about like, oh, what must that be like to not have to worry about paying $2,000 for this, or, but that place of bitterness breeds that fear for me. And I have to, I have to not let myself get to that place.
Is it like a jealousy that breeds this bitterness?
Yeah, it's absolutely jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible. It's ugly and it's nasty.
Well, it is because of, the feelings that you describe. But I would say that I'm just thinking through. I'm not like a quick processor. That's the only problem with these interviews. I'm like, oh shoot, I should have said that.
Sorry, I'm a
Whenever,
fast talker too.
no, it's good. I just think about like those moments where we have these feelings of like, this is terrible. This is so disgusting. This is just, I'm worthless. Like, yuck. That we can know, all of us can positively, absolutely 100% know that is not ever from God. Do you know that? Yeah,
Thankfully.
because God might convict us of things now and then. Like, hey, Catie, like, you can share this, whatever God decides to say. But it's always going to be with a gentle spirit and love. It's going to be it's always hopeful. There's always hope when God is speaking to us. And so, it's interesting. Like, I was in this little group once, and the leader would always say, anytime you have these moments of, ugh, gross, like these overwhelming things, we can stop and just say, let me look around for a second. Like, what am I doing right now? Because, like, evil wants to attack where we're doing good work. And so you might pat yourself on the back, like, I must be doing something good, or I must be growing, or I must be experiencing some kind of freedom here, because otherwise, like, where is that message coming, that shameful message coming from? Not everybody believes the same thing when it comes to like Satan and all this, but I really believe that there is like supernatural evil wherever you think it comes from, and it will get you where it matters,
Yeah, it does. It really does. And I feel like for me, I like to call it like my enemy.
Mm-hmm.
That fear is my greatest enemy. And it's funny because I was talking to a colleague of mine who's also a therapist, and she struggles with anxiety, and she was telling me thoughts her anxiety was going on in her mind, and I was like, but that's not God, because
Mm-hmm.
God is loving, and I doubt that God would put thoughts in your head that would, or send you messages that like, you're not enough, you can't do this, you're gonna die in 2 seconds, whatever it might be. And I've always, sometimes I feel, sometimes people say like, God spoke to me and said this entirely very coherent message, and I was like, that doesn't happen. I don't know. God and I are on like different wavelengths in that terms of communication, but I know it's always a feeling for me. It's always an intuitive feeling, and my intuition is really has never let me down. And when I have moments when I'm at church with God, when I'm taking a walk and just praying and meditating on these things, I mean, He knows what I want for myself. He knows what's in my heart. He knows the dreams I have. But He also has always looked out for me. He's always been there for me through this whole journey. And I know He'll keep being there for me. And money in our culture is not an easy thing to talk about. It's so painful and it's so frustrating, and it holds so much symbolism and value and meaning. But I don't know. I've also learned so much about myself, and it's strengthened my faith in a way that has it's been healing, and healing's often very painful.
Totally.
And Do I wish I could go back and just kind of like condense the process a bit? Yes. Do I wish I could go back and make different choices to help myself in the future? 100%. But do I regret being where I am today? No.
Mm-hmm.
And do I know, I really don't. I really don't.
Yeah. Do you have time? I wanted to, because we started talking before this a little bit about church, and I was like, oh, I could talk about this for a while. Like, so I asked, like, do you go to church, or do you have a church? And so, and you said, like, sometimes you go. Well, tell me, say what you said to me.
So sometimes I go to church, like the traditional, like brick and mortar church.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it's hard for me to go to church because sometimes I feel like I just don't fit into church because, you know, there's many things that have always made me feel separate from church. One is I'm a young adult. Well, I don't feel like I'm much of a young adult anymore, but I don't see people like me. And I'm definitely not saying in terms of like my appearance because, you know, I see people like me. But, you know, I don't see people like me in terms of like me and my partner. And she has a lot of trauma when it comes to faith and spirituality. And so I don't invite her or ask her because I know she'd probably say no and she'll go when she wants to. But, or like someone who's unmarried at this point and kind of making it on their own, or someone like I don't feel seen. I don't feel understood. And it's really, I don't know. And I think in terms of, especially talk about money, like people who are my age have kids and they have a home and then they're successful and something is working that is not working for me. And that's where shame comes up from. Just like, I don't feel like I can relate to you and I don't know if you can relate to me.
Yeah.
But so I don't go. Sometimes I'll go because there are some repetitive things at church that bring me comfort, like taking communion or singing the songs or just going for a sense of peace.
Mm-hmm.
I'll definitely go during those moments. But for me, I've always found church to be my walks with God.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing more connecting for me to God than going on a walk in the morning and just being present and just sharing my thoughts and prayers and meditations on things with him.
Yeah. I just think that's really important for people to hear. Church folks like me, we need to know that first of all, there is more than one way to do church, even though we always want people to do things the way that we do them. But also to recognize, like I mentioned, to go into a place, be surrounded by people, but feel alone is so lonely. It would feel better to be alone and alone, not surrounded by people, And I just think when we go back to like, who was Jesus, where was Jesus? He was with the people who were feeling not seen and not heard and like they had no place, And so I think as the church, just the people, we really need to keep that in our minds. Like we can't think that we're going to be sharing the love of God at church. That is like not really, I mean, yes, do it. But there's a lot more places we need to be and a lot more people we need to be seeing and hearing and not just, and then also like letting them see and hear us, in that space of kind of vulnerability and stuff. So yeah.
I think it's funny because we talk about going to heaven and I always hear depictions of heaven being like, just like endless worshiping of God. And I was like, you've got to be joking. If going to heaven is like going to church for the rest of my life, I don't know if I want to do that. And I was like, I don't want to sign up for this. But I had a moment with myself a while back where I thought, to me, worshiping doesn't I hear worshiping and I think you're small and they're big and you don't matter and they matter. And it makes them feel good and you're just serving a purpose. But for me, my worship with God is just bask in gratitude. Just so much, just awe and gratitude. And when I'm on a walk in the morning, just regardless of the weather with God, that to me is heaven. And I just think if heaven is basking in gratitude and wonder, then that's it for me.
Well, that's a good point, because a lot, like in the Gospel of Luke, for example, so Luke, when he uses the word salvation, the Greek word is a word, it's an act of healing. So when he's like offering salvation to people, the Greek word was like every act of salvation was an act of healing, and it didn't begin later, like when they died, it began immediately. And I think we have to remember that, like, we're all waiting to die to go to some kind of like, heavenly realm for eternity, but we don't need to wait. All of this begins today, like what you're saying on your walks. And so yeah, it's like immediate. That's sort of the theme of that gospel, is like, it's immediate, starting today. Like there's a rush, like Zacchaeus runs to the tree, like, let's go to your house today. It's always this like sense of like, it's starting today. And so we have this sense of like waiting. But really random thought before I stop talking and let you talk. My son is like, oh, I don't want to like go to heaven. It's like, that sounds terrible. It's like a thing to sound like we're going to just be up there forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And I was like, oh, like, no, it's supposed to be really fun, But I recently, like, some Facebook page I'm on with a bunch of people who are like ex-evangelical, they call themselves, or unfundamentalists. They're like really wrestling with certain truths of Christianity. And they're just like, who else has a really hard time with this idea of heaven? And everyone's like, oh my gosh, that traumatized me as a child. And I was like, wow, I never thought of that. Like, to me, I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. But it's interesting to hear these different perspectives. Like, we need to be talking to people who have these different perspectives, and,
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Lauren, if we could talk about spiritual trauma, sign me up.
Exactly.
I have so many thoughts and feelings on spiritual trauma. And it's funny because I didn't know I would be able to get to a place to say all of this. I didn't know and ever expect myself to get to a place to say, like, my testimony with God as strongly as I do and as confidently as I do.
Mm-hmm.
And there are moments when it's terrifying, but I just, there's always been something that has like magnetized me back to it. There's always been something where my soul feels rest in it. And there's always been something that no matter what's going on, I always look back and I can always see where God has been there for me. And I definitely have moments where I'm like, yeah, we're going on a couple months hiatus. I'm kind of sick of you, and I don't know if you're sick of me. And but I always come back.
Well, the visual of like, you're coming back, but I feel like God also is drawing you. Like it's that, that dance where like you like fake a fishing pole and then the person has to come back. It reminds me. And then really quick, and then we'll wrap it up. So you said you grew up in a family where you didn't go to church, and your family wasn't really very religious or even spiritual. So then at what point did that shift for you? Was it, you said you were going to a church that was kind of like, didn't mean a whole lot, but was that just sort of the beginning?
Yeah, I feel like when I was a teenager, it actually started when I was a teenager, because I remember, I was so silly, but I remember wrestling when I was a teenager with the very binary concept of good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I would journal a lot on making good choices versus bad choices, and what does this mean? And that never left my mind. And when my dad was alive, there was one point in my adolescence, like when I was like 17 years old, where I was just battling anxiety, because that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, maybe if you go to church, maybe that would help. And I went with his girlfriend at the time. But I was just like, oh, people don't look like me here, and I don't understand this, and why do I have to give you money? And so it just kind of planted a seed, I suppose. And after he passed away, yeah, I was drawn to a need of comfort. I was drawn, I don't know, I don't think it was an active thing, but it was accelerated in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I went with a friend who was a coworker of mine at the time, but her church was deeply, deeply, deeply fundamental. And for me, having anxiety and not knowing what I was doing and going into a fundamental environment was really damaging.
Oh my gosh, I've been there.
Yeah, it was very, very, very damaging, especially during that time when I had to figure out, like, oh my gosh, I am not heterosexual. What does this mean? That was a whole journey of itself, and
I know.
it was.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your journey with that, but I guess another time. Do you think that how did that run into your view of God or the way you thought God viewed you? Was it just like no big deal, or did you have to wrestle with that? Or
I did have to wrestle with it. I wrestled with it a lot. The minister, the pastor at the church that I had gone to, that very traditionalist one, was like 2 steps away from conversion therapy, and he was like, "You need to hang around more guys. You need to have more guy friends." And I was like, "Fun fact, I have a lot of guy friends, and nothing's changing." And I think it deepened the inherent sense that I feel like I'm just not worthy. Like as I was not good enough, and I just was never good enough as I was. And I was doing everything that they told me to do, like pray to be different and pray to be the right way and pray for this. And I was like,
you were actually from the church. They were actually telling you, oh my gosh.
oh yeah, oh yeah. There's a lot of stuff I could tell you that they told me, but yeah, and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and the harder I prayed and the more I prayed, the more I got the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
The more I got support for, well, what happens if you come out? And the more I got support for, you're loved as you are. And, even sharing this now, I can only imagine there might be people who see this who are like, you're still wrong. You're 100% still wrong. But I have learned that the more I lean into the love of my faith and the love of who I am, the stronger my faith is. And there are still some days when I wrestle with God. I'm like, am I really doing the right thing? But like I said, my partner is an answer to my prayers.
Mm-hmm.
She's incredible. She's just incredible. And it's made my faith stronger. It's made my faith actually deeper,
Mm-hmm.
and so much more authentic.
Yep.
And if that's what it means to be wrong, I'll take it.
Yeah, and I could go on and on about why I know that you're not wrong. that would be that would be a lot of time. Anybody who says, the Bible's very clear, the Bible's absolutely not. And so we need to sit down and have that conversation. That's not you and I, but just anybody. That's not a conversation you can have in passing. That's a conversation where you really need to sit down and realize, like, the way we view, like, homosexuality today didn't even exist when the Bible was written. Gender was not binary. It was like a total spectrum. Oh my gosh, I could go on, but the bottom line is, like, God does not make mistakes. God has created us just exactly as we are. The fact that you're even telling us that, your faith deepened and all of that, that's a great indicator, that God loves you, and as you walk into that, the more you're able to accept that love, and so I think that's great. And there was something else I wanted to say about that, but I'll probably think of it later. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I also think, just that sense. Oh my gosh, yeah, I remember. Certainty. We all want certainty. You said somebody could be watching this and say, I know for sure you're wrong. But the problem is nobody can know that for sure. And so I would encourage those people to, look deep within and maintain some humility, that uncertainty is with us. That there is no certainty like that. What if we're wrong? We always have to ask ourselves those questions. But the last thing I wanted to say is, like, some of your story, some of it, little pieces resonate with me, but I'll just share, like, I am very focused on right and wrong. Always been very focused on right and wrong. When I went to college, I was like, I don't want to be a Methodist. I want to be a Southern Baptist. I want to go to a church that has rules, because I really like that certainty. And, just as I've gone on and on, that's been a big deal. I'm like, I want to know that I'm doing things exactly right. The anxiety about money. Anyway, end of the day, learning that there's something, and you might know about this, but it's really not that well known, but there's something called OCD scrupulosity, like this obsession with right and wrong, and oh my goodness, when I figured that out and started getting help from a person who specializes in that, my life totally changed. I was like, this is a thing, and I think the problem is we sort of like look to those people who are so pious and like doing everything according to all these rules as like very holy, but not if they're tortured, not if they're constantly worrying about this, like, right and wrong. Anyway, that could be a whole tangent, but
I know. I would mark that under sermons I would give if I could.
Yeah, you could. I'll let you, maybe you should come give us a sermon. But yeah, so anyway, so Dina, I shared this comment briefly, but thank you for sharing your story.
For saying that.
And yeah, thank you for sharing your story. And I always forget to say this part, but if anybody listening ever wants to like get in touch with you, they can reach out to me, I guess, and I can give them, I would put it here, but you never know who's gonna, I don't want you to get like spammed with some random email. But yeah, I will definitely like put people in touch with you. So, and let me pray. I'm going to pray and wrap it up if you don't mind.
Perfect.
And then you can stay on, but I'll end the broadcast for everybody else. So everybody pray with me. Almighty God, thank you so much for this time with Catie, for her willingness to share with us, for the spirit that you've given her, for the gift that she is, just this vulnerability and this authenticity that we have been able to receive from her that will strengthen all of us and help all of us and helps us see you more clearly. I thank you for the wisdom that she's imparted and just the new perspectives that we've gained. And as we depart, I also just ask that you remove any like spirit of fear or just anything that's not from you, so that Catie's able to experience what I know that you intend for her, which is complete freedom, complete peace, that she has larger and larger moments of that, where she is no longer hindered by, this fear and survival that she really needed for a short time. In your name we pray, God. Amen. All right, I'm going to close up, but you can stay on. Bye, everybody.